bad guys to kill.
I made myself. I cannot be unmade. I am all powerful.
You, however, have a problem with women.
How perceptive. Did you figure that one out when I kidnapped you, or when I tied you up with leather straps?
Oh, come on, you scream like a girl. Do it like this.
I'm the bag.
Good evening, everybody. It's Inappropriate Characters.
Hello and welcome. This is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords. And today I'm with, as usual, Grim Jim and Venger. And we're coming to you live, and we're going to be talking about a number of topics today, mostly gaming, but a few that aren't.
Yep.
Talk about dice, because specifically I think that there's been kind of a craze of increasingly weird, rare, whatever, production of dice. A lot of companies are making them. I think there's been some Kickstarters that have generated ridiculous amounts of money for dice, and gamers have always been obsessed with dice, but I think that here with the 5th edition era, you could say there's been like a level of obsession with dice that I'm starting to find a bit weird. But this is Venger's topic, really, so we're going to hand it over to him, and he'll explain his particular beef with this subject. Go ahead, Venger.
Okay. I don't know if it's so much of a beef. Oh, by the way, my throat may be kind of scratchy. Hopefully that's not irritating to the people listening. I don't know if I started coming down with something. I don't have any other symptoms, but my voice is just kind of weird. So I don't know if it's a beef, but it's just like a curiosity. I mean, sometimes in my weaker moments where I'm like, $2 million Kickstarter, why not me? I'm frustrated and jealous. But most of the time I'm just like, that's so bizarre to me. I mean, I love dice too. I've got like, I don't know, probably a couple hundred at my house somewhere. But if you want a money-making Kickstarter that pretty much can't fail, go into the dice business. So I think this is the top grossing role-playing game-related Kickstarter, this Dispel Dice. Actually has 6 hours left to go, ironically. These are a lot of numbers, so bear with me. 19,767 backers. You probably were thinking like the money, but no. So the total of the money that's come in so far is 2,353,282. So it just went up like $100 just in the time that after I said that. It's crazy. I mean, yeah, they're nice looking. They got cool names like Amethyst, Galaxy, Jewel, Nebula, Inferno, Phantasm. Like really cool. I wish I would have thought of that, some of those names. But why? Why are people going nuts? So if you want one set of dice, it's $48. I mean, you can get some nice looking dice down the street at your local game store for like $10.
Yeah, it's not.
I mean, I know there's a market out there for it, and in my weaker moments, I'm like, oh yeah, I need some $50 dice too because those look pretty boss. But it's not just me or like a handful of people. It's almost 20,000 people out there that are, shelling out for these luxury dice. It's crazy. And on Twitter, all you have to do is show people the dice that you made. Doesn't matter if they're beautiful or shitty or lopsided or what. You will get like 200 likes and 100 retweets and a bunch of comments, and then you will be a Twitter superstar in no time. I see it all the time. I'm like, I want a piece of action. Like, what's up? So, yeah, I'm just kind of flabbergasted. I'm not sure what's going on, but yeah, it's good to be in the dice business.
So let's establish a couple of basic points here. First of all, no gamer really needs more than one dice set, and a DM probably doesn't need more than 3 or 4 dice sets, let's say. But pretty much every gamer I know has way more dice sets than that if they're at all serious gamers. So this is, on the one hand, this is something that has always been true in the hobby, I think. People like to collect dice. And, it's understandable in a way. They're an important feature of the hobby. Now, on the other hand, this seems like insane to me that there would be such a level of obsession with fancy-looking dice or with weird-looking dice that you get these massive Kickstarters. Like, I think before this, the biggest Kickstarter, if I'm not mistaken, related to gaming, had to do with miniatures. And at least with miniatures, it makes a certain type of sense, because if you're the type of gamer that collects minis, I'm not, but if you are, then I can understand that, because you're going to be collecting different minis, right? But with the dice sets, it's not like they're different types of dice. They haven't invented the D48 or something like that, right? And unless you're talking about the DCC dice that Goodman Games has, but every other
D69.
Yeah, it's all just the standard set, right? The D10s, the D4, D6, D12, D20, D8. And for some reason, this is huge business. Now, somebody in our comments pointed something out here, which is, I think, the deeper issue. Dracopol said, companies are making more money from fashion accessories than from putting effort into actual games. And this is a problem for the hobby, right? I've talked in some of my earlier videos on my channel, the RPG Pundit. You guys should all go and subscribe if you haven't. There's a video where I put out that basically Wizards of the Coast and kind of the modern, well, really it's mainly Wizards who are the modern corporate interest in gaming, has a vested interest in changing gaming from a hobby to a lifestyle. And when people are showing off their dice on Twitter, as Venture pointed out, and you're absolutely right, I've seen the same thing. You do a search for the hashtag D&D, and a huge percentage of the posts you're going to see at any time, and especially the top posts, are people showing off their dice or dice sellers trying to show off their latest fancy-looking dice, right?
Yeah, and the T-shirts and dice bags and... Yeah, the accessories in general, but dice being one of the major ones. But this is not different than what you see in other lifestyle functions, right? Like if you look at, I don't know, hip-hop, a lot of the posts in social media are going to be about hip-hop clothing, hip-hop accessories, bling, etc. Stuff that tells people when you show this that you're a part of the lifestyle, right? And you're getting social credit among your subculture for having that lifestyle. And this is a big problem because it means that the emphasis is going away from actually playing the game. I mean, I'm fairly convinced that there's quite a lot of people on Twitter, for example, who don't regularly play D&D 5th edition, but they'll show off their dice, they'll show off a painting, the picture that they made or commissioned of some character they rolled up but haven't ever actually played. In fact, I've seen posts that say, "Oh, this is my Dragonborn lizard mage boy that I've drawn, and he's gender neutral, and I haven't actually played him yet, but this is a drawing I paid to make of him." Right? This is allowing an infusion of people to get influence in the hobby, which is being transformed into a lifestyle, without actually having to have the rep of being actual gamers. I don't know what you think, Grim. I think gamers have always had a dice fetish. I mean, if you go way back to the oldest copies of Dragon magazine that I can think of, there was always game science going on about how accurate and mathematically perfect their dice were.
and there were people selling weird dice like D30s and books of tables to go with the D30. Certainly, I'm guilty of being a bit of a dice fetishist, but I think I would balk at spending $50 on a set of dice. That's a bit much for me.
It's crazy.
But different ones have become sort of fashionable at different times. There was that spate of metal dice that were really sort of heavy and dense that everyone was into, and then stone or semi-precious dice. You can now pick up metal dice off somewhere like Wish.com for a fifth of what they're charging for these ones. And if you're after some pretty cool dice on the cheap and you don't mind waiting, I would certainly recommend going and looking there. They've got metal ones, glow-in-the-dark ones, blood-stained ones. Yeah, it's all cool. Then games started coming out with sets of dice that were themed for the game. So Vampire the Masquerade had a green marble set. Mage had a purple set. Seemed like every game that came out had a thematic set of dice, and that's continued. And I guess the next outgrowth of that is these dice that are specifically keyed to the game. Fantasy Flight Games is very big on that. They've got weird symbols and stuff on them rather than just being dice, which I think is a bit shitty, but that's me. But yeah, I've bought dice at conventions or shows or game launches and things the same way you might buy a band T-shirt when you go to a gig or something to remember it by, But I think that fetishization of dice and even a degree of what you might call dice animism has always been part of the hobby. It's got to this higher level, I think, because people have more disposable income. And with a dice, you know what you're getting from the get-go. With a game book and the development problems that can exist there, you don't necessarily know what you're going to get at the end. So maybe that's why dice are such a big thing. Yeah.
Dave Pettit in our live chat pointed out the exact same thing happened with the punk scene back in the day. As someone who was in the punk scene back in the day, I totally agree with you, Dave. And in fact, it happened from ridiculously early in the punk scene, right? Like you saw this by maybe even the late 70s. I don't know. I wasn't quite in the punk scene at that time, but where you had people dressing up in these ridiculous fashions, their hair in the mohawks and all that sort of thing, that you didn't actually see in the bands or in the gigs, right? This is people that were dressing up in this kind of lifestyle look of what television presented punks as, as how they looked, right? And of course, this had a very interesting effect. And I wonder if this isn't something that's also going to happen in gaming, which was that the people that were real punks, right, like the ones that were into it for the music and for the movement and for the gigs, they would immediately be able to spot these posers, and you would, there was this kind of purity testing going on where if you saw someone that was dressing up in these really fancy designer yet supposedly punk clothes, you knew right away they were a poser. And I think maybe we're going to start seeing some of that in the gaming world, where you'll end up having people that are presenting themselves as lifestyle gamers that are going to end up eating some shit from people who actually game.
That was kind of weird about punk, though, because when it started, it was all very DIY, safety pins and stitch your own clothes and make something out of bin bags or whatever. And then sort of Malcolm McLaren happened, and I'll make myself unpopular here, but the Sex Pistols, for all that I quite like them, were a boy band, really, when you think about it. So does that mean Critical
Maybe
Role...
Maybe the greatest boy band ever, but you're probably right.
Yeah, but does that mean Critical Role are the Sex Pistols and Matt Mercer is Malcolm McLaren?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, that's a very good analogy, actually, is that these people that are lifestyle gamers, they don't game, but they'll watch these very professionally made shows that are completely ersatz of people supposedly gaming, right? And so, like, you get this this ridiculous element of people that haven't actually gamed at all, but that are feeling like they're part of the scene,
Does that mean that the end is nigh for true punks like us?
Well, I don't think so, because if you see for example, in the punk movement, as the musical movement, it kept kind of reinventing itself in different ways over time. Now, there are some real grognard punks, I guess, that say, no, punk is dead, right? Anything after 1977 is not real punk or something like that. But I mean, what you see happening consistently is that you get some kind of new element to punk that shows up, and it's really genuine, and then it kind of sells out. And I was like, I saw Green Day performing, and this is going to sound really weird to anyone who's like sort of a punk today, because Green Day are like the biggest fucking sellouts, right? But when I saw them, they nobody knew who they were yet, right? Like they hadn't, or they were either just about to, or had only just released the Dookie album, right? And so like no one knew them, and they were like totally genuine, and it was fantastic, right? And then very quickly they turned into complete corporate sellouts, but. I think that what'll happen is that inevitably the fad of, just like the fad of punk or subsequent movements related to punk, inevitably die out, and then you get this return to something more genuine. I think we're going to see the same thing here. And in some ways, I think this ties into our second subject of the night, which is taking a look at D&D 5th edition and how 5th edition is creating its own kind of little bubble, even in the area of actual gaming product, in the form of stuff like the DMs Guild. Venger was very curious about this question of, is the DMs Guild basically a gaming ghetto? So kick us off with that, Grim.
Yeah, so D&D has always been its own thing. It's been kind of like the Hoover or the Kleenex of gaming, right? It's the brand that's synonymous with the pastime. So it has always been kind of difficult to make people aware of the wider, broader gaming world. And unfortunately, it's been my sort of feeling, but it's very hard to get any sort of hard statistics on this. I was trying earlier in the lead up to the show, as my co-host will attest. It's really hard to drill down to the data and see whether there is any crossover, but my instinct is that the success of 5th edition is not bleeding over into the greater sort of role-playing ecosystem. I don't know, when did the DMs Guild actually start? When was that launched? Is it 2 years ago?
Yeah, I think 2 years ago.
A bit under, I think, but just around, yeah.
Yeah, so in all that time, because the DMs Guild is part of the same set of sites that's all under one bookshelf, right?
Yeah.
So in all the time that the DMs Guild has been up, I've sold 5 products through the DMs Guild, and you still seem to get sort of cross-site recommendations and so on, but I've sold hundreds and hundreds and hundreds through the other sites. I got some stuff on the War Games sub-site they've got, and I got some stuff on the well, it's just Drive-Thru now. It used to be RPG now. So there just doesn't seem to be that crossover there, and that's concerning me. I'm going to show my age a bit here, but here in the UK, we used to have a much more broad role-playing culture than I think America did. And part of this was down to the ubiquity of Games Workshop. There was a Games Workshop store in pretty much every market town across the UK, and certainly every city had at least one. But at that time, prior to 1990, they didn't just sell Games Workshop products. They didn't just sell Citadel miniatures and Warhammer. They had plenty of role-playing games in there as well. 1990, that all changed. The accountants took control of Games Workshop, and White Dwarf magazine stopped being a general gaming magazine. It became a monthly catalogue for just Games Workshop products. And that really did a lot of damage to the broader hobby here in the UK. Suddenly you weren't being exposed to all these other games. There wasn't a convenient place to go and shop and to find them and to encounter them. The staff in the stores became hostile to anyone who talked about other games. I'm not kidding. It got that bad. And so the role-playing hobby kind of got shoved underneath wargaming for decades. And I'm worried, again, that sort of in the dying days of AD&D, there was this blossoming of other RPGs and an awareness of other games. And that genie seems to have been forced back into the bottle quite a bit. And there just doesn't seem to be this greater awareness of the hobby that should normally, historically, piggyback on the success of something like D&D. And it's anecdotal, but from what little data I can get, that does seem to be what's happening. The success isn't translating so much, and that worries me.
Well, Venger, you're also a publisher, so I'll pass the floor to you before I say anything to see what you think.
Okay. Well, what Grim said makes a lot of sense. But like we were talking about the Dispel Dice Kickstarter and how that's making mega bucks. There are a lot of other gaming Kickstarters that focus on gaming books, either their own role-playing game system or source books for other games, and a lot of those do really, really well too. It's not unheard of to see 50,000, 75,000, 150,000 for some pretty much brand new game that nobody's ever heard of. They're just the right place at the right time, the right elevator pitch, maybe some great artwork, and I don't know, the lightning strikes and it's huge, and people buy. I don't know after that if people play the game, or maybe they play it, they try it, and then they go back to D&D or they do something else. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a lot of people playing all these different games, but I know that a lot of money is being made outside of D&D, and I think we're all doing fairly decent. With like PDFs and print on demand and things like that. So even though it still seems to be all about D&D, I think that there may be some trickle down effect, because role-playing game just seems to be big right now. And even though people aren't laser focused on non-D&D games and gaming, I think it is helping everybody else to a lesser degree, of course. So I'm encouraged, but I don't want to go overboard. I think D&D is still, the main force, but we're not out of this yet. So,
well, Venger, when you did Chalt, which is your newest product, I remember that you made some effort to try to suggest that it is, a setting usable in 5e, that it's 5e compatible, etc. You've now sent me a review copy of the book. I'll be doing a review video of it sometime soon. And you've kind of got some of the stylistic elements of 5th edition there. And that was obviously something very intentional on your part to try to tap into the 5e market. Now, it might be early days still, but do you have any impression on whether you've had any success with that or not?
Before the one or two fans that I still have called me a sellout, 90% of it is because I actually like quite a few things about 5th edition, which we've talked about before on the show. There's a lot of things that are good about 5th edition, even though I don't run it like by the book or rules as written very often. I did when it came out to kick the tires and see what it was about. And then I kind of drifted back my old school roots, but I still have adopted a few things here and there that are like 5th edition. And so I kind of married those together with my own house rules hack of O5R instead of OSR. Crimson Dragon Slayer D20, I'll just plug that quick. That's kind of the middle ground, and that's also an appendix in Chalt. And I think, I don't know, I don't have a lot of feedback on that. A lot of people that are in old school like Chalt, and a lot of people that like 5th edition have tried it and think that, yeah, you could use it with it and they're happy with it. But I'd say 80% of my audience is exclusively old school or OSR people. There's not a lot of 5th edition people, I think, or purists of 5th edition playing Chalt or playing any of my material, which, you know, is mostly compatible. There's a lot of room. There's a lot of room for people to go back and forth and switch and meld things together and do their own thing. I don't know if 5th edition people are doing that, but
that was part of the intent with 5th edition when we were designing it, was for it to be very, you know, modular, very able to be adapted and to get some of that OSR element that you have with where, you know, basically any 2 OSR books can be run together, right? Like you can very easily adapt any OSR product from one writer to the OSR product of another. But I'm not too sure how many 5th edition gamers have actually been doing any of that, whether it's, you know, making their own mods to 5th edition, or much less bringing in other products that aren't, you know, official D&D products and using those.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell.
I like 5th edition as a rules set quite a lot. I mean, I'd still want to fuck with it because I'm a game designer and that's what we do. We fuck with rule systems. But I think
you're welcome.
But I think that there is something else going on here. I mean, we've talked a little bit about how like Critical Role and so on, and this gaming as a lifestyle. There seems to be a particular kind of cultural lens that's kind of going along with 5th edition, that people want to play in a quite a specific, cuddly, fluffy, non-OSR sort of way with it, unfortunately. And I think that might be what's quashing interest in other things. They want to play in that very specific sort of style, the Fantasy Seattle, I think you call it, Pundit.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Whereas I want to do something gritty and nasty and horrible with it, and Venja wants to do something weird and strange and out there with it, and you want to do something authentic or explore different cultures in what you do. I think we've got actually a fairly good spread of approaches to gaming between the three of us. And none of that particularly jibes with what the big audience wants, which is unfortunate, but, you know, you've got to stay true to your creative urge, I think.
Well, you know, here's the thing that I see is that tied into this idea of D&D as a lifestyle, and you're right, the lifestyle has a particular culture, and it's very much a millennial type of culture, let's put it, right? Fantasy Seattle. So I wonder what it's going to be like in a few years when the Zoomers get a bit older. Judging by how conservative some of these Zoomers are, and we'll be talking more about that a little bit later in the show. I wouldn't be surprised if like suddenly Lion and Dragon and Dark Albion end up getting more popular. In fact, with the next generation, as they want to play like ultra conservative, hardcore Catholic crusaders in a medieval authentic world based on European myth or something like that. You know? But anyways, my wish fulfillment aside, the thing I see is that eventually, you know, it tied in with it being a culture and with it being a lifestyle, you can also say it's basically a fad, right? And at some point, fads die. So the real question, the things we don't know are this. First, we don't know when the fad goes out of style, what percentage of people that have adopted 5th edition will keep being into RPGs once it's no longer so popular in mainstream culture. We can assume a lot of them won't, but we don't know exactly how many, because it'll be very different if like 50% of them go away versus if 90% of them go away.
Yeah.
And the second thing that we can't really tell for sure right now is just how many of the people playing 5th edition now are also looking at other games right now. Like people who started gaming with 5th edition, right? Like this is their first game.
how many of them are already looking at other products, and how many will look at other products once the fad dies down. Like, I can say I've had a lot of people who've told me from my products, Dark Albion, Lion and Dragon, and stuff like that, that have commented to me, I was gaming all kinds of different things, and then I got Lion and Dragon, and this is like what I always wanted D&D to be, and it's awesome and whatever. Right? What I've never heard anyone say is, I was playing 5th edition D&D. That's the first game I ever played, and then I found Lion and Dragon, and I think it's awesome. Right? Like I would like to think that maybe there's some people who are relatively new to the hobby, who started with 5th edition and then have discovered the OSR and been getting into it. I've been trying to promote the OSR in that way to try to draw in people that are into 5th edition. I think a lot of people are trying that in different ways. But I have no clue how successful that's been. I suspect that right now it hasn't been very successful at all. Yeah. Maybe when the fad dies away, it'll be more successful. And the other thing, drawing to something you said at the beginning of your comments, Grim, is there is a cycle that tends to happen with RPGs. You pointed out that in the dying days of 2nd edition, when 2nd edition was at its most decadent and useless, it created a space where a whole bunch of other games kind of appeared. And that's true, right? And then 3rd edition came along, and a lot of those games went bust because 3rd edition was really good and solid and popular for a while. And 3rd edition had its own version of the DM's Guild, which was the D20 license. And we saw the same thing before, right? We saw that there was, at the peak of the D20 product boom, there were thousands and thousands of third-party D20 games or products, the vast majority of which were really awful and probably didn't sell very much at all, and nobody remembers. There's a tiny handful of those that today we think of as really memorable. I can't right now think of a single DM's Guild product that has really broken through to being something really memorable that everybody talks about. I don't see that. I see on social media that people mainly are talking about the big, Wizards products, the campaign books that come out and stuff like that. And, the only other thing that is 5th edition that I've seen people talk about was the Adventures in Middle-earth product, which isn't a DM's Guild product, right? And it was made by a big company and what have you. So I suspect that the bust of DM's Guild will eventually be as bad or worse than the bust of the D20 movement. And now one thing that happened at the end of 3rd edition, when 4th came along and suddenly you had a really shitty version of D&D again, is that this led to a space for the growth of the OSR, and the OSR became more successful. With 5th edition, the OSR hasn't disappeared, but it's in some ways maybe it's not growing as much, or is a bit less central than it was when the main edition of D&D was utter crap, right? And so that back then there were people that might have been looking to get into D&D that would not go to 4th edition, but would end up getting into the OSR, that today are getting into 5th edition, at least for now.
Yeah,
so
even talking about the culture, though, I mean, even the big sort of tentpole D&D products aren't safe. The reason we've got this gypsy background on the stream, and why the thumbnail was from Snatch, was because yet again these sort of gypsy stand-ins in Ravenloft are in people's sites.
That's right, yeah.
Because it's racially insensitive and so on. I mean, yeah, to a degree, but Ravenloft was trying to emulate like the old Universal Pictures version of Dracula, or Bram Stoker's books. So if you go back to the source, the gypsies are seen as bad, wrong, in the service of evil, or whatever else, and that's what it's playing into. Not the Roma as an actual people, but how they were portrayed and used in these films, and then using an analog. And I mean, most fantasy societies in books are some kind of analog to something from history. We don't tend to see Swedes or the Finns or anyone else getting up in arms over the depiction of of Vikings or Viking-derived societies. It seems to be a weird kind of disconnect and failure to understand what's going on and to just assume bad faith immediately. It's unfortunate.
Can I give some background to our viewers about the context of why this is relevant right now?
Yep.
On Twitter, the last day or so, there's been a minor tweet storm from some SJW that has been complaining about the fact that in the Ravenloft Wizards product, the Vistani, which are the Ravenloft equivalent of gypsies, are a racist stereotype, and that they're terrible and inaccurate. And they've been demanding that Wizards change Ravenloft and hire someone who is a Roma person to reinvent the Vistani as, I don't know, woke culture people or something like that. Which seems a bit silly in some way. But yeah, it's another one of these moves that, lately there hasn't been that much. This is really small fry in a way, because I've noticed that the last few months there hasn't been that much crazy SJW stuff happening in the gaming world, and I don't know if that's a good sign or whether they've all been taking time off to complain about Thanksgiving and Christmas. But yeah, there's been some guy that has been saying there, and a lot of the SJWs supported him on this, that it's just terribly offensive, the Vistani, and that this is racist and that it shouldn't be in D&D. And some other people point out, but it's bad because it's also an intrinsic part of Ravenloft. And I don't know if you can really have Ravenloft without them. So I'm not sure if even all of Ravenloft is problematic. And of course, in the responses, you saw some people that were pointing out that they themselves were gypsy or of gypsy descent, that were that they don't think it's really all that bad. And I actually saw in one of the person that did the OP, I think it was the person, maybe it was some other SJW, said you shouldn't be using that word gypsy because it's an offensive word, and you should know that if you're, and he's like, no, it isn't really, we kind of, we don't really, we've repossessed that word and we don't think it's offensive,
Yeah, I mean,
now, I'll admit that, obviously the Vistani are a stereotype, and back in when Ravenloft was created, it was very clearly not meant to be inspired by something like real history, but rather to be inspired by the Gothic novels of the 19th century, Dracula and Frankenstein, all that stuff. And so it included this imagery. And could you make them more rounded as a culture? Sure, yeah. But I think also some D&D products have done some of that. Maybe not to the extent that the SJWs would want, but I don't think they've always been presented as villains in Ravenloft. And if you're doing a different product, like in my Dark Albion setting and in Lion and Dragon, I have a kind of equivalent to that, which are the Kimri Travelers. And in that product, I don't want to pretend I'm woke or something, but I present the Kimri as sort of what the real perspective on these traveler people was in the in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, which is that they were outsiders in the culture. They were pariahs that were nevertheless had a certain space and were sometimes utilized by people at different levels of the society, but that were often the first people to be blamed when there was something wrong going on, and that were suspected of witchcraft and stuff like that. And I think that makes some very interesting role-playing fodder. I think it's certainly much more interesting to have a detailed sort of authentic take on a traveler culture, presenting them not as, like heroic victims or as, evil servants of the devil, but rather as a culture of their own that are outsiders in this particular world, and that can do things that are both good or bad, right?
Yeah.
So
Mr.
I wouldn't be opposed to that necessarily.
Mr. Triceratops in the chat makes a good point. To make a culture more rounded, you do that at the game table as the games master. A game source book only has so much space in it, so it gives you the stereotypes and the broad picture, and then you build on it. And I bet you a good amount of money that most of these people flying to the defense of gypsies, of the Roma, have never met one. Now,
Yeah,
I live out in the sticks, right? And we get traditional gypsies with their caravans coming through and selling heather in the high street in the local town. We get modern travellers, crusty jugglers, turning up and trashing fields and causing all kinds of problems. And we get the Irish travellers, the pikeys. We get them too. They're fine people, but they have a very different set of morals, I guess, a very different societal paradigm to those of us who live in one place all our lives. And there is a clash and a misunderstanding and so on. And so even if you are doing the most woke representation possible, I think you'd be doing a disservice to travelling peoples by not acknowledging that they're thought badly of by the people who live around them, wherever they happen to stop. That's part of what it means, and conflict is where story is, so it only makes sense to include that.
Makes sense to me.
But I'm crazy, I guess. I don't know.
That's why you're on the show.
Yeah, because I'm evil. Shall we move on? There was a PAX fuss, wasn't there?
That's right. So we're going to look at some more SJW ridiculousness. I guess this weekend was PAX Unplugged or something like that. And there was a post that someone did on Twitter saying there are very few people of color on PAX, at PAX, and I'm available to be a friend to any who are there, like this real virtue signaling post. And there was one guy who responded to that, what he said is, there is a diversity room or something along those lines. First of all, I kind of question why there needs to be a diversity room at a gaming con, but okay. And so an old friend of Venger and Grim Jim's here, Swordsfall, the guy that made the Afrofuturist RPG and has then been pretty much dedicated to getting attention by calling everyone racist, jumped on this topic. And it's funny because at the very beginning, he jumped on and criticized the guy who offered to be a friend to the people of color at the gaming convention. But then when he looked into this other guy, the guy who made the comment about the diversity room was a guy named Jonah Falcon. He decided that was a much better target. And I'm pretty sure that the reason why he decided that is because Jonah Falcon has some high-level followers on his Twitter stream. Now, this is a guy who's apparently into gaming, but he's known as a kind of very minor celebrity in a totally different context, which is that apparently, now this is very funny, Jonah Falcon is known to have one of the largest penises in the world. And this particular, freak quality of his physiognomy caused him to end up being like on the Howard Stern show. And, he's followed by some celebrities and stuff like that. And so obviously, an SJW is going to attack people in order to get as much possible attention as they can. So you want to go after the higher level target. And, I should point out that Jonah Falcon has noted that he himself is Latino and gay. And this, of course, doesn't really stop anything. So here you have the left eating itself, where they've just been bombarding the guy up to the point that he's very clearly distressed because he didn't expect his comment about, that there is a diversity lounge to lead to hundreds of SJWs on Twitter accusing him of being some kind of white supremacist or something like that, So it's quite a ridiculous story in every way you look at it.
I'm going to add him to my Twitter followers right now.
There you go.
Well, I mean, that's just a classic example, isn't it? So PAX got into trouble back in, 2010? With the whole Dick Wolves saga? Maybe it was a bit later, 2013?
2013, I think.
Yeah, so they had their comic in which they were making fun of the fact that so many quests in MMORPGs are just nonsense. So you have to. All these people are being poorly treated in this mine. You have to go and rescue 5 of them, but it makes absolutely no impact on the game as a whole. You don't get any bonuses for rescuing any more. And they had this one sort of NPC pleading with the character, "Oh, please, every night we're raped to sleep by dick wolves." And the fact that they the fact, to try and get him to rescue them, but the fact that they used rape as a joke. Already, you can see how that might upset the usual suspects, even though this was back in 2013. And then at PAX, I guess 2013, Gabe, the artist, drew a dick wolf on one of the panels up on a big screen. So that set everybody off. And partly in response to that, they set up this idea of this diversity lounge, a sort of safe space that people could go to. So step by step, they've kind of bent over for everyone. They've provided spaces, they've undertaken to make the place more welcoming and so on. And now the existence of the diversity lounge is taken as being bad and wrong, even though it's something that was suggested to them by activists and which they took on board and put into effect. How do you please these people?
You can't. And I mean, the proof of it is these guys going after this dude, right? That it's just been unbelievably vicious, right? Like the guy's only comment was, "There is a diversity lounge," right? And here you have Swordsfall saying, "Everyone should know this guy is going to be at PAX Unplugged. Be careful, watch out. He's really dangerous, and it's disappointing that PAX is associating with this kind of guy. I don't want my friends to be hurt," right? As if saying there's a diversity lounge means that this guy's going to kill people there. Like they're just nuts, right? And people, followers of this of Swordsfall, have been apparently trolling him, posting on his Twitter feed, trying to tell him to commit suicide.
I don't. The Swordsfall, his entire process of getting fame and attention seems to be sort of getting up on a ladder, step by step, of harassing people of slightly increased fame and influence or notoriety. So he's worked his way through us. And now he's on to celebrities. Nothing makes him happy. Anyone who is insufficiently woke, but still woke, gets his wrath. He's got rabid followers that he just unleashes on anybody, and they harass people to the point where, if you do something that he doesn't like, he will go through your entire friends list on whatever social media you've got and tell everyone on that list that you're a Nazi or a fascist or a white supremacist or whatever else, and start harassing them to unfollow you. And this works. That's what really irks me, is that this seems to have worked to build him a profile. And it has worked. It's everything anyone ever accused Zach of being, right? And however questionable or not you might think that is, this guy is that, dialed up, and gets away with it somehow. It aggravates the piss out of me.
Well, hopefully people see through that bullshit.
Maybe eventually.
I think it's becoming more evident to people as time goes by, and I think that the SJWs can kind of tell. They're starting to realize that nobody except each other is paying any attention to their bullshit, and this is why you see that they're now focusing on attacking other liberals, so to say, right? Because the audience of people who are willing to consider their argument is diminishing. Yeah.
So next week he's going to be attacking Mick Mercer.
Matt Mercer.
Yeah,
probably.
That's a viable term. Yeah, this is a case of a movement devouring itself, right? Which is inevitably what happens with these types of movements.
Yeah.
I think Mick Mercer edited or wrote the Gothic Rock Bible or something. I don't know. It's from the UK. I don't know, Grim, if you've ever heard of it, but
no, I would look it up, but my keyboard is really
Mercer
loud.
Is from the UK, though.
What's that?
That Mercer isn't from the UK.
No, not Matt Mercer. But
different Mercer.
Whoever I thought I was talking about, Mick Mercer.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, Gothic rock.
Let me see if I can type really, really quietly here.
Okay, make more sure.
Stupid expensive keyboard.
Rock.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, all you ever wanted to know, but we're too gormless to ask. about the Gothic
cover. Yeah.
Maybe because we were talking about punk, and I don't know.
Yeah, set something off.
All right.
And your accent, Grim, just like sent me back to 1993.
Benzer is here having his own program, right? Like
I'm having a Gothic rock flashback. No,
it's the
he's
magic
like
of
Homer
storytelling.
Simpson inventing the movie plot in his own mind, right? Like, well, wait a minute, the police commissioner was in it all along, and it's like, what? There's no police commissioner here. You know, I don't know what's happening now.
Has Swordsfall actually produced anything yet, or is it all?
I don't know if that Afrofuturism RPG of his came out or not, but I mean, like, one way or the other, he's never going to make any inroads, right? Like, this is something that will only appeal to the tiny clique of people who are, you know, the virtue signalers, right? He's going to be stuck there, making, you know, mainly being famous for his tweets more than anything else.
For being a gigantic asshole. Really, he's got all sorts of products, but I'm not seeing much in the way of books here. A graphic novel, a bunch of stickers, a tarot deck, hats, shirts, prints. Any books? Any books? Let's have a look. Books.
What's our audience saying?
Art
if
book,
we have any left.
Art book, graphic novel, a novel. A digital book about creatures. I don't know if that's actually got any role-playing content in it. Pantheons. Has he actually done any gaming work? This all just...
No idea. And it's clearly irrelevant to both him, his audience, and the rest of us. That's not what people follow him for.
Yeah, I mean, there's a wiki with some stuff on there.
Hey, I can see myself.
What's especially aggravating is that I was actually fairly supportive of the idea of this project to start with. Different aesthetic and everything. I think I even retweeted some of the early promo stuff. Then to find out he's just a gaping fistula of a human being, is just... I feel dirty.
Well, it happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Or if you're Jim Raggy, it happens almost constantly, right? Where you're back the wrong horse.
Yeah, unfortunately. Ugh. I'm surprised you're still with us, Benja. How come you haven't been dragged away to bed yet?
I still have 7 minutes.
Oh,
all right.
Okay.
Are you on my wife's side now?
There's no good answer to that.
Move on to our last planned topic for the evening, then.
Yeah. While
All
we
right.
still have him.
Okay. So the last thing we're going to talk about isn't really an RPG subject, but I guess Grim is demanding certain amount of equal time, and on account of on this program, we very routinely end up mocking the far left, so to say, which is really to say these days in a lot of places the mainstream left, the left of Corbyn and the Democratic Party nowadays. But the once in a while you get some ridiculous shit from the extreme right as well. And lately there's been quite a lot of that, in that there's this movement of very extremist elements in the right that are, a very small group, but that, as usual, shout above their weight. And then with the right, the problem is also that they get a lot of media attention because the media is desperate to claim that this is like an important part of the right when really it isn't. But they love to give, like Richard Spencer, for example, is a guy that the only reason anyone knows his name is because CNN and MSNBC don't shut up about him, because they want to try to suggest that the rest of the Republican Party has anything to do with him when they don't. But anyway, these guys are, they're known as the Groypers, and they came to fame a few weeks back when they basically trolled an event of Turning Point USA. Turning Point USA is a university-based conservative movement that tries to, change the culture in the universities towards, being right wing, right? To promote conservative values. They're pro-Trump and all of that. And at one of these events, Charlie Kirk, who is one of the leaders of the TPUSA movement, got just massively trolled in the Q&A by a whole slew of these Groyper guys that were asking some questions that he wasn't capable or ready to answer, with some very kind of anti-Semitic overtones and overtones of extreme racism, so to say, and he was taken by surprise, basically. And then they did the same thing to Donald Trump Jr., who came out with his own book. Donald Trump Jr., by the way, if you are a conservative, you really want to add him to your Twitter. His Twitter feed is even better than his dad's. The guy is a complete badass, and I quite enjoy his Twitter feed. And I'm sure his book is very good, though I haven't been able to get it yet. But they went to one of his book signing events and did the same thing to him. And so these guys are, they're anti-Israel. They're opposed to funding for Israel. They're opposed to all immigration, legal or illegal, of any kind. Right? They've explicitly, some of their thought leaders have explicitly pointed out that they are basically opposed to democracy. They don't want a democracy. They want a kind of theocratic fascist state. And they want to impose strict moral rules on the rest of society. And these last few days, they've been spamming the hell out of, first it was Gab, which is already a very kind of right-wing social media site, but then it spilled over into Twitter and probably a few other areas where they've been very vociferously campaigning to argue that all pornography should be illegalized, right? That basically porn should be completely forbidden, which is, completely in line with what they think and not really in line with what most other people on the right think these days. So there we are. And I don't know if you had anything to add about that, Grim, because you were the one that wanted the topic brought up.
It's I've been seeing this brewing for a while, and a lot of conservative commentators and news sites like Gab and so on really kind of latched on to the free speech counter movement that sprang up against social justice types. And, they sold themselves as being free speech platforms and free speech champions and all the rest of it. And we're seeing the mask slip a bit, fairly big YouTube commentators like Lauren Chen, I think, has come out against porn and against sex workers, and Gab obviously has gone off on this big, huge rant against porn, and quite hilariously has been referring to porn is the new drug, which is a Mormon anti-porn campaign, which has zero relation to reality. And we've spent so long fighting the left, or people who at least call themselves left wing. I think we might find ourselves reluctant or find it hard to resist similar censorship and authoritarianism coming from the right this time. So I guess this is kind of a call to arms to be consistent. If we're for free speech, if we're for free expression, it has to be consistent.
Venger, do you want to say anything about this before your wife makes you go to bed?
You're a filthy degenerate like me, so
sure.
No, he's not. He's the model. He's the model of what these guys want. He's a white guy who is married and has a ridiculous number of kids.
Yes. Can you see that meme? I don't know. It's probably backwards or something.
Yeah.
The first one, I've seen that meme a lot in different, categories or whatever. And I'm pretty sure the first picture is from like one of those housewife shows. And then I don't know where the cat's from. Is that also from like Housewives of Beverly Hills or whatever? I don't know. That's just a footnote. If someone watching knows anything about that meme, I'd be very curious about the origins. Anyway, we could have a whole show about religion. I'm mellowing now that I'm 45 and married to a somewhat Catholic wife, and I have 5 kids who we try to instill.
That explains the number of kids.
Yeah, we try to. Well, we both wanted a decent number of family, and then she gets pregnant very easily, and
Catholicism, because every sperm is sacred.
Yeah, we had an oops with twins, and that just bumped us from 3 to immediately to 5, and so that's kind of crazy. I don't know. I'm never gonna be okay with getting rid of porn, or like like I can't understand the anti-porn people. I mean, if you don't like it, don't watch it, I guess. It's not like you're inundated with pornography. I mean, I guess if you lived in downtown New York in the 70s or early 80s, like right next to 42nd Street, and it was all just like porn theaters and like hookers, and then maybe you'd be irritated, or you'd at least have a point. You either could be desensitized or overstimulated, or it brings about a bad element. You got a lot of, I don't know, winos and crime and other degeneracy, but it's pretty much under control now. I mean, if people want to like watch some porn on their laptop or something, like in the privacy of their own home, I don't know. Yeah. It's just 1% of political faction thinks that's the hill they want to die on. Once you're dead, nobody will mourn you, and we'll just go on the rest of our lives. So
yeah, it's just what's happening though is that I think those of us who are for free speech, free expression, don't have an issue with porn. We're now caught in a pincer movement. One side wants to wrap their authoritarianism in feminism, and the other side wants to wrap their authoritarianism in think of the children, and you just get caught in the middle. I mean, we actually had that happen here in the UK. Fortunately, the anti-porn firewall thing has kind of fallen away, at least for now, because it's just impractical to implement. But that was David Cameron's Conservative Party and Gail Dines' feminist anti-porn movement coming together to try and censor the internet. And, well, just today, I think a story broke that Twitter's going to start clamping down on not safe for work content, which means a lot of sex workers in the adult industry, sort of pornography sense, are going to end up cut out of that platform. They've already lost Tumblr, and this
that's the reason they go to Twitter.
This is people I know that I'm friends with. Anna Cherry, I don't know if you guys know her. She does a naked D&D thing, which you should all check out. She's a good friend of mine. I don't want to see her income get destroyed. I don't want to see other people effectively put out on the street because they can't get their content out there to people.
You should really send me a link to that.
I'll find it for you later.
Okay.
This directly impacts people's lives, and you already have all the tools you need to avoid porn if you don't want to see it. So I don't understand this attitude, and the trouble is, if we have both left and right wanting to censor sexual expression, what chance have we got? I
don't know.
Well, let me start by pointing out again the one issue with this kind of supposed dichotomy, which is that the feminists in the left wing have enormous influence, right? The feminists and the SJWs have tremendous influence, tremendous power. They have a lot of the control of the culture. The Groypers have zero influence or control of the culture, right? And they've managed in their trolling to make an enemy of the Trump family, which they supposedly support, right? Though no one understands quite why, because they say they're
they're against legal immigration and they're against Israel, and the Donald Trump and his family are in favor of legal immigration and in favor of Israel. But there we are. So it's still not a both sides kind of issue, right? Because the one side of the political spectrum has embraced their insane fanatics and is promoting them, right? To the point that now in the UK, where you're from, Grim, the most important left-wing party has wholeheartedly embraced rampant and virulent anti-Semitism to the point that the chief rabbi of London had to basically make a statement against the Labour Party.
Okay, I'm not a huge fan of Jeremy Corbyn, but I would take some issue with that, but it would take a whole thing. Basically, they're classing criticism of Israel in with anti-Semitism, which is a bit dodgy, but then some people do hide their anti-Semitism within that. And the chief rabbi is a huge donator and supporter to the Conservative Party, so he may not be entirely unbiased, but there is a problem with anti-Semitism in the Labour movement. I don't think it's quite as bad as they're saying, though it's still pretty fucking bad. And that's because there's this conflation of the idea of the rich fat cat capitalist and the rich fat cat Jew on the left, unfortunately. And it gives me pause. I think it should give anyone pause, but the Conservatives are still worse because they hate everybody, not just Jews.
Yeah, well, I think
Conservative Party in the UK, the Tories. I should clarify, not Conservatives in general.
The Tories have a fairly multicultural bunch in their tent, right? Whereas the Labour Party, what their position basically amounts to is that they're totally fine with a Jewish person being in the Labour Party as long as that Jewish person denounces Israel and is in favor of Hamas, right? Which is like the most ridiculous thing you could imagine, right?
We'll end up down a rabbit hole if I argue too much.
Yeah, all right. Okay. So let's leave that for the moment. So I've already pointed out in the sense in which this is not the same in both sides. But now I will point out the thing that is worrying about these groypers, which is that their demographic skews extremely young, right? Like their chief kind of figurehead right now is a guy named Nick Fuentes, ironically a mixed race Latino like myself, who has also very ironically advocated against mixed marriages, right? So technically he thinks he shouldn't exist, but there we are.
Party.
And he's only like 24, I think, or 26 or something. He's really young. And a lot of the people that are in this movement are really, really young, right? Like they're guys in their teens or very early 20s, mostly men. Sorry?
Just wait until they get married. Porn is going to be their best friend in like 5 years.
I don't know if you want your wife hearing that, but okay.
Yeah, she's probably got a voodoo doll already take me. Speaking of which, I gotta go.
All right.
Take care.
I'll pause my rant to say, remember, viewers, that if you want Venture to be able to stay up later, you should check out our Patreon. Give us some Patreon dollars, and you should share the videos, subscribe, help Inappropriate Characters get bigger, so that then Venger's wife will let him stay up another 15 minutes or so.
For every $20 more that we get on Patreon a month, I get to stay up another 5 minutes.
There you go. You've heard it right here.
Such a worthy cause that I can't believe it. Oh, also, before I go, I've got a new Kickstarter. Chult Fuchsia Malaise is the name. And hopefully you back that because it's a follow-up to the original Chult. And it's going to be fucking awesome. Okay. Good night, guys. Thanks. Good show.
Take care. So I was saying, that these guys are the groypers tend to skew very, very young. And so that is a problem right now. I would say when you look at what has generated this, I think that it is not unfair of me to put a lot of the blame on this on the establishment left. because what you had was a generation, about 5 years ago, of very libertarian-oriented right-wing celebrities, so to say, that were people that were advocating for, basically what the Trumpian movement is really about, which is this kind of civic nationalism that was not racist at all, that was in favor of, saying basically race is not relevant. It doesn't really matter. Your sexuality doesn't really matter. What matters is your values. It matters if you believe in America, if you're patriotic. What matters is that you share Western ideals, and that we don't believe in a government that gets to censor you in any sense, whether it's your political ideas or whether it's how you entertain yourself. And the response from the big media companies, everywhere from old media like CNN all the way down to social media like Google and Twitter and Facebook, was to clamp down on these people, to censor them, to deplatform them, to vilify them as Nazis, et cetera, et cetera. And so this opened the door for a much more extreme group of bad actors to come in and draw in the upcoming generation into their ideas, because if everybody on the right is a white supremacist, then that helps to legitimize white supremacy, and that's a big problem, right?
Sorry, I'm trying to silence the bleeping from my computer, which is apparently annoying people. Where is it?
So yeah, I personally think that the censorship of the left has been part of what's contributed to the radicalism of the right. That, and as I mentioned before, the fact that the left loves to point out these extremists and treat them as if they had as much influence over the right as their own extremists have over the left, which of course they'll never criticize, right? Like to CNN, Antifa are heroes, right? They're perfectly fine.
Yeah, there's always a reaction when something like this happens, and it's kind of natural and predictable. But it's just I guess the pseudo left has pushed things way too far for ordinary people to accept, and then so as a result of that, a lot of stuff has been conflated together, and so they're reacting to perhaps a push too far by some of the trans activists and so on, and then they're folding their hatred of pornography and sexual expression and so on into the same thing. I think it all kind of comes together. But you're right that there's still an imbalance of power in that the social justice-y types have a lot of... Well, they don't have a lot of hard political power, but they have a lot of soft power and a lot of power in education and so on. That's true. But what concerns me is that these people have been part of the resistance to that, whether you love them or not, and with them no longer helping resist, there's less opposition. And that's how things like Twitter now deciding to crack down on NSFW content, that's how they get away with it.
I agree that it's a problem. And I mean, the interesting thing is that just like your buddy Swordsfall is mostly going after moderate liberals, people that aren't as extreme as he is, these groypers, they don't go around trolling, left with. They're not trolling MSNBC. They're not trolling the Young Turks. They're not trolling, the Vox or anything like that. They're trolling Turning Point USA. They're trolling Donald Trump Jr. Right, and so they know very much, at least their leaders know very much, that their way to get popularity is by attacking the right, the actual libertarian right, and then getting attention from mainstream media because of that, right? Like, so if they were attacking Antifa the way certain earlier conservative movements were, then the left would instantly give them a different kind of attention
then if the left can say, oh, look, these are the extremists on the right and they're taking over the right or something like that, which they're not. But that's the image that they're going to try to present.
There's a tie-in to the anti-Semitism as well, because there's an old trope / conspiracy theory that Jews are using pornography in order to undermine the West or something. I've been running into that on and off for years. Yeah, and that certainly seems to be a thread in this.
Yeah, absolutely. With these guys, it all comes down to anti-Semitism, unfortunately. And, you know, what I like to do because ironically, these last 2 months or so, I've been spending more of my time on social media getting into fights with groypers than I have been getting into fights with SJWs, right?
Yeah, I've noticed that same trend through the last few months. I've been butting heads with these kind of people more often.
Yeah, it's been taking up a lot of my time, which I don't care for. But so, you know, what I like to do is call them Islamists, because basically they are, right? They're exactly the same. They want a non-democratic theocracy. They don't want women doing whatever they like with their bodies. They want a highly restrictive culture being enforced by a big government, and they hate Jews. So, like, in what way are they different from Islamists, right? They're not representatives. They like to try to present themselves as being champions of Western civilization. They're not. The people that are champions of Western civilization are people that champion the Enlightenment ideals that made the West the greatest civilization in human history and made it different from every other civilization in human history. These guys hate the Enlightenment. They want to go back to a medieval West that was no better or worse than any of the other shitholes. You know, it was a tribalist place of violence, intolerance, and obscurantism, right?
And I think they miss a really important key factor in what has made many civilizations great. If you look back to ancient Rome, it was essentially multicultural. It allowed people of different ideas and thought to come together, and that's what helped make it such a grand civilization. And the Islamic Golden Age, that was a time when Islam was tolerant and would allow different people with different ideas to come together, and it flowered, and then it fell away when they became more strict.
Okay, yes, but not in the same sense that we see in multiculturalism,
No.
you know, as promoted by Frau Merkel and company, right? Or by the Democrats, or, you know, what you see with your Mayor Khan there in London, who, you know, when an Islamist murders 3 people, says diversity is our strength as his result, right? This is the big difference.
To an extent, you can take anything too far, obviously.
Well, no, but it's not too far. It's a different type of multiculturalism, and this is the difference. I'm going to explain it. In the Roman Empire, the great innovation of the Roman Empire was that being Roman wasn't defined as where you were born or what was in your blood. Being Roman was defined by citizenship, right? It was the birth of civic nationalism as a concept, right? So to be Roman, you had to believe in Rome as a concept. You had to believe in the Roman values as an idea, and you had to aspire to be a citizen of Rome. And that was the genius of them. That was what made them different, say, than the Greeks, for example, even, who had some good things going for them too, but didn't have that going for them. And this, one of the things that these groypers try to do is that they make very legitimate criticisms of the whole, you know, diversity is our strength leftist concept, which they define as being a society where you can be full of different groups of people that don't.
Ooh, you cut out. Have I lost you?
Studies have shown that, in fact, it doesn't, right? In fact, many of them hate each other. But multiculturalism tends to isolate people. It tends to have people shut in their communities. It creates general distrust that increases in any society. That's very harmful. And the reason for that isn't because you have, you know, black people and white people in the same neighborhood. It's because you have people that don't believe in anything in common in the same neighborhood.
Yeah,
right?
Integration is important, I think, and shared values.
That's right.
The British Empire used to be quite good at that.
That's right.
That sense of being an imperial citizen. Yeah.
Yeah, it has to be that you create a nationalism of values, right? A nationalism that believes in the same and holds dear the same truths as a culture.
Yeah.
And that can, therefore you can have people that have all kinds of different cultural differences, that eat different foods, that have different religions, that have different dances and have different, holidays and whatever, but that they have the same allegiance to democratic concepts, the same allegiance to individual liberties, the same allegiance to
there's an overarching set of ideals or something that exists slightly higher than the other values. I mean, Rome also allowed people to keep their more sort of local identities as well, and they had the brilliant trick of taking soldiers from one area of the empire and putting them on the other side of the empire so they couldn't be involved in uprisings and so on. I'm no fan of Islam, Vorpal Anvil, but the point is that when it was at its height, when it was at its best, when it was making scientific achievements and so on, that was the time in which they were tolerant. That's my sole point there. I think you're thinking I'm speaking highly of Islam when I'm not.
No. I didn't want to call. I was more concerned about your when you were describing multiculturalism and you brought in the Romans
it's
as an example. But they're really, that I mean, there's no question that there was a kind of an Islamic golden age, and that in that golden age, you had a society that had a similar type of, not just tolerance, but they had an open-mindedness of ideas, right? And the moment that golden age collapsed was sometime around the 13th century, basically after the Mongols
Al-Ghazali, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, where they fell backwards into this idea of embracing this tribal traditionalism, right? And similar things happened in China too. Usually, I made a point once. I did an article about this that when Genghis Khan rolled through most of the known world, he destroyed the Song dynasty in China. He destroyed the Islamic culture in the Middle East. But he didn't get all the way into Europe. And that was one of the big differences, because after the Mongols, both the Chinese and the Arab world retreated into this kind of everything that was in the past was better and we don't want anything new sort of attitude, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this is the risk that happens when a society abandons open-mindedness. And this is why people that are opposed to open-mindedness are so, whether they're from the left or the right.
Yeah. To round this off and kind of bring it back to gaming, and then I'm going to have to go to bed, so we're going to have to wrap up. Open-mindedness and tolerance, that's what's missing, and that's part of what's a big threat to gaming. This is a creative enterprise, and you have to have that space to explore ideas, to touch upon taboos, to investigate, to explore, to play with stereotypes and difficult ideas and conflict in order to make games and to make them effective and to make them engaging and interesting. And we've been essentially oppressed by the left for a long time, and now I'm just worried that this other side is creeping in as well. And fighting on two fronts is rarely a good idea.
Yeah, though I think that the guys on the right are a lot less skilled at it than the guys on the left, right? The guys on the left have been working on this since the 1950s, since the Frankfurt School, and Gramscian socialism. So they're a lot better at it.
Yeah, I agree. I want to enter that note of caution into the record, I guess.
Well, the thing is, people on the right have to be able to answer these guys. One of the things that made them suddenly so noticeable is that when they ambushed Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA, they asked him questions that he should have been able to respond to, and instead he didn't. He just fell back because he was taken by surprise. He fell back on meaningless catchphrases, and they got him. They absolutely got him, right? But if somebody who had already had some kind of contextual experience of dealing with these guys that had been confronted with the same questions, their questions were very easy to rebut from a conservative point of view. It's just that they picked the right target, I guess. I don't know.
Have you got anything to pimp before we log out?
I do, but before I get into the pimping, I can't avoid this. This is the 9th of December, and we're probably not going to have another inappropriate characters until after this happens. You're about to have an election over there, and I can't help but dig a bit of salt into the wound that from what I've been seeing of the electoral projections of the maps there, you're in for an ocean of Tory blue, aren't you?
Well, it's a really, really unpredictable political landscape at the moment. Labour.
Do you honestly think that Boris isn't going to get a majority government?
I think it's 50-50 whether he's going to get a majority or whether it's going to be pretty much where we are now with a hung parliament. Yeah, record numbers of people have indicated that they're going to vote tactically. That's enough to sway somewhere between 30 and 60 seats. I mean, I studied politics. I have accreditations in it. I studied history. I have accreditations in that. I'm keen on politics. I follow it a lot. And ever since Brexit, nothing has been predictable about British politics. Things that should have ended Johnson's career haven't landed. When Theresa May had her sort of snap election, it looked like the Tories were going to get a larger majority. Didn't happen. Nothing is predictable at all. If you push me, I will say I think the Tories will get a narrow majority, but it could be a big one. It just depends how things fall on the day. I think it's more likely to end up with another hung parliament, and then it's anybody's guess what the fuck is going to happen.
Well, I'm betting that the Tories will get a solid majority. Maybe not a landslide majority, but maybe. But I think those are your options, and Brexit will happen.
Well, unfortunately. First past the post also tends to distort things. I can't remember the last time we had an actual government that a majority of people voted for.
I think that really there's two things you can blame this on, and one is that the blatant attempts to delay an election by the anti-Brexit group really ended up looking bad. Yeah. And second, and probably even bigger, is the fact that Corbyn is the leader of the Labour Party, and he's just, there are seats that have never voted anything but Labour for 80 years that might not go Labour this time.
It's a little bit odd because he is very old school Labour, and when he did win, I thought, oh, here's a guy who he indicates a necessary shift back to the left from the Blair years, but he's gone too far. And somehow he's disconnected even from those traditional Labour seats. I think it's because he's London, urban, and he's like Bernie Sanders in the States, right? He's taken on some of the pseudo-left woke stuff, unfortunately.
Yeah, well,
even though, in his bones, he's old school Labour, but still.
Yeah, I mean, Corbyn was a guy who for decades was anti-EU and then suddenly became pro-Remain because his party demanded it.
Yeah, and now he's neutral. This whole thing is an enormous clusterfuck, and I wish the goblins would come and take me away right now.
All right. So, anyways, as far as pimping, right now I've got this product that's about to come out that's called the OSR Companion, which is a collection of Medieval Authentic Companion, which is a collection of stuff from RPG Pundit Presents that is going to be a huge 266-page source book of medieval authentic stuff that you can put into any OSR game. But I mean, it's also especially good for people that like Lion and Dragon. And it's going to be a great product, but unfortunately, right now it's in development hell because there's issues. We can't identify whether the fault lies with DTRPG or with Lightning Source or with both or whatever, but there's been ridiculous delays. It was supposed to come out last month, and it's not right now. We still don't know exactly when it's coming out, but it'll come out soon. Also, because I've changed publishers, there haven't been any new RPG Pundit Presents issues out, but there is going to be some new ones coming fairly soon.
Including about Lion and Dragon sci-fi.
Yeah, the RPG Pundit Presents number 100 will eventually come out. It's coming. We're going to start releasing some more Pundit Presents, and number 100 will be the space opera OSR mini game, which will basically be an adaptation of Lion and Dragon rules for playing space opera sci-fi.
Cool.
So I guess for the moment, just keep your eyes open, guys. And if you do want to give me a tip, aside from the Patreon we have here or the Patreon I have on my channel, you can pick up any of the current RPG Pundit Presents issues. There's like 96 of them. So if you haven't taken a look at all of them, take a look, because there's going to be stuff you're going to like there that you can use. There's stuff that's from the gonzo weird fantasy end of the spectrum, and there's stuff that's like medieval authentic fantasy. There's adventures and all kinds of other things that you can use for whatever game you like. And they're low-cost PDFs. It's kind of like sending me a tip, but you also get something back for your money. So, that's all I have to promote for the moment. But pretty soon, you'll be seeing the OSR Medieval Authentic Companion and some new issues of RPG Pundit Presents.
Cool. I'm getting print proofs of our election party game that I did with Rachel Haywire. Should be arriving tomorrow. I'll probably do a video on that if people want to check out my channel. Post-mortem video tomorrow, late. There should be something there. Otherwise, because I get ill, unfortunately, I'm trying to rein myself in and not overpromise stuff. So I'm not going to promise too much about what's coming up, because I don't know how well I'm going to be, and Christmas is always disrupted. So instead, I'll use this time. I'm running a crowdfunder for charity for a friend of mine, Jamie, who is an avid gamer, disabled. They just recently found out that they had been misdiagnosed for over 10 years. And unfortunately, the treatment they were getting for what they were supposed to have made the condition that they actually have, which is MS and something else, worse. So we've been crowdfunding. We've got enough to get them an active wheelchair, but we would like to get some more money in to help pay down some of the debts that they've incurred while they've been disabled and in trouble for so many years. You can find that on justgiving.com/crowdfunding/Jamie's Awesome Wheelchair, which I know is a really unwieldy URL, but if you check out my social media, you should be able to find a link there. So we're just trying to raise a bit more money to pay down some of their debts so that month to month they're a bit better off. And Georg Mir, the guy who made the Mictim game, which is a hamster RPG, he's probably got a lot of red flag terms to a lot of you on his profile, but he's a decent dude. He's having a hard time, so if you can find him on social media, he's trying to raise some cash by selling Mictim, which is his hamstery game. So if you feel like helping out either of those people, that's what I appreciate happening. Oh, someone's asking about my cat. Yes, Charlie's okay. His leg's still broken and gimpy, but it's healed, but it's healed wonky. But there's nothing we can really do about that. But he seems happy, purry, eating, everything. He's fine. Thank you so much to everyone who donated to help him out, because that cat means the world to me. So.
Well, as a cat owner myself, I can sympathize. And those do sound like some very good causes, Grim. So check it out, guys.
Yeah. Joe messaged me privately, and I'll tell you what's going on with that other stuff. But we really should call it a night. I need to get some sleep before tomorrow. All right. Goodbye, everyone.
All right, everyone. Take care. We'll see you next time. Currently smoking Brigham anniversary pipe plus Peterson's Wild Atlantic.
Cool. Currently wearing beard oil. Later, everyone. Bye-bye.
I'm the bad guy?
Yeah.
How'd that happen?